The letter of Pontius Pilate to Tiberius Caesar. The message that Pontius Pilate addressed to Emperor Tiberius about Jesus reveals surprising details regarding Jesus' appearance, information not even found in the Gospels. In the letter, he describes the miracles performed by Jesus, his trial, crucifixion, and, intriguingly, his resurrection. Pilate begins by saying,
"To Tiberius Caesar Emperor, greetings Majesty. The recent events in my province have been so extraordinary that I feel obligated to report them in detail, as I believe these occurrences may in the future profoundly impact the fate of our nation. It seems that, lately, all the gods have abandoned us. I am inclined to believe that the day I assumed Valerius' place in the government of Judea was cursed, for since then, my life has been marked by worries and afflictions. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, I took possession of the praetorium and organized a grand banquet. I invited the Tetrarch of Galilee, the high priest, and his officials, but, to my surprise, no one arrived at the appointed time. I interpreted this as a gesture of disrespect toward my authority and the Roman government. A few days later, the high priest came to visit me with a serious and deceitful demeanor. He claimed that his religion did not allow him to share a table with Romans, but his expression betrayed the falsehood of his words. Although I accepted his excuse, I clearly realized that he and his followers opposed the Roman presence. I recommend that the Romans maintain vigilance over the high priests of this land, for they would not hesitate to betray even their own relatives to obtain power and wealth. Among all the conquered cities, Jerusalem is the most challenging to govern. The population is so insubordinate that I live in constant fear of an uprising. I have under my command only one centurion and about 100 soldiers. I requested reinforcements from the governor of Syria, but he informed me that he barely had enough men to defend his own province. Our ambition for expansion seems to exceed our capacity to protect what we have already conquered. I fear this may lead to the collapse of our empire. I sought to keep my distance from the population, fearing that the priests might incite the rebels. Even so, I tried to understand the mentality and actions of this people. Among many rumors, one caught my attention, the story of a young man in Galilee who preached a new doctrine in the name of a God who had sent him. At first, I suspected that he was inciting the people against us, but I soon realized that this was not the case. Jesus of Nazareth seemed more sympathetic to the Romans than to the Jews themselves. One day, as I passed through the square, I saw a crowd gathered around a young man leaning against a tree, speaking calmly. I discovered that it was Jesus, which did not surprise me, given the contrast between him and those listening to him. I did not wish to interfere with my presence, but I asked my secretary to mingle with the crowd and listen to what was being said. My secretary, Manios, grandson of an old conspirator who supported Catiline in Etruria, is fluent in Hebrew and absolutely loyal to me. When Manios returned, he reported to me what Jesus had said. Never in the works of the great philosophers have I found anything comparable to the wisdom of his words. A Jewish rebel asked Jesus if it was right to pay taxes to Caesar. He replied, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's." It was this wisdom that led me to grant the Nazarene his freedom, even though I had the authority to imprison or exile him. It is a characteristic of the Roman government. Jesus was neither an agitator nor a rebel. I offered him my protection, perhaps without him realizing it. He had the freedom to speak, teach, gather with the people, and choose his followers without any intervention from me. If one day, which the gods forbid, the religion of our ancestors is replaced by that of Jesus, it will be this tolerance that will have been the reason. I, as an unfortunate instrument, will have played a part in what the Jews call providence and we call fate. This freedom given to Jesus disturbed the wealthy and influential Jews. He criticized them harshly, which, to me, was reason enough to let him remain free. To the scribes and Pharisees, he said, "You are like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside but full of rot inside." He challenged local traditions, stating that humility was worth more in God's eyes than any prestigious position. Daily, I received complaints at the praetorium about Jesus' words. They warned me that something terrible might happen to him, as Jerusalem has a history of stoning those who claim to be prophets. An appeal to Caesar was being prepared, but the Senate approved my actions and promised reinforcements after the Persian War. I decided to take action to maintain peace without lowering myself. I invited Jesus to the Praetorium for a conversation. He accepted. Being of Spanish and Roman origin, I am not easily impressed, but when Jesus appeared on the balcony, I felt as if I were stuck to the marble floor. I trembled like a guilty man, while he remained serene, like the very personification of innocence. As he approached, he stopped and, with a simple gesture, seemed to say, "I am here," without the need for words. I was deeply impressed by this man, a figure our artists had never imagined when creating their sculptures. There was nothing repellent about Jesus, yet I still felt fragile and aged in his presence, unable to approach him. "Jesus," I began to say, my voice trembling, "Jesus of Nazareth, for the past 3 years, I have granted you great freedom of speech, and I do not regret it. Your words are practical and full of wisdom. I do not know if you have studied Socrates or Plato, but I perceive that the simplicity and greatness of your discourse place you far above these philosophers. The emperor is aware of this, and as his representative in this region, I am pleased to have allowed you to speak freely, something you clearly deserve. However," I continued, "I must warn you that your words have attracted powerful and misguided enemies. Socrates also had enemies and ultimately became their victim. Your adversaries, even more enraged, are against you due to the severity of your words and against me for allowing you to speak without restrictions. Some have even gone so far as to accuse me of conspiring with you to undermine the little civil power that Rome still grants the Hebrews. My recommendation, not an order, is that you be more cautious and moderate in your words from now on, considering that your opponents may use pride to incite the masses against you, forcing me to act according to the law." Jesus calmly replied, "Ruler of the earth, your words do not derive from true wisdom. Ask Mount Torah to stop in the middle of the valley, and it will answer, and it obeys the natural laws and the Creator God. Only He knows where the waters will flow. I tell you the truth, before the rose of Sharon blooms, the blood of the just will be shed." "I will not allow your blood to be shed," I responded, moved. "I consider you more valuable, for your wisdom, than all these discontented Pharisees who abuse the freedom that the Romans have granted them. They conspire against Caesar and slander him, convincing the people that he is a tyrant determined to destroy them. These ungrateful ones do not realize that sometimes the wolf wears the skin of a sheep to fulfill its dark purposes. I will protect you from them, my praetorium will be your sanctuary, day and night." Jesus, unconcerned, shook his head in a gesture of denial and, with a calm smile, said, "When the time comes, there will be no refuge for the Son of Man, neither on earth nor beneath it. The true refuge is in the heavens." Pointing upward, he added, "What has been prophesied will be fulfilled." "You are forcing me to turn my request into an order," I replied, apprehensive. "The security of this province, under my responsibility, demands it. I ask that you moderate your speeches and do not defy this order, as you know the consequences." "May happiness accompany you," Jesus replied. "Prince of the earth, I did not come to bring unrest, but to bring peace, love, and charity. I was born on the same day that Augustus Caesar brought peace to the Roman Empire. Persecutions do not come from me, but I will face those that arise, in obedience to the will of my Father, who has shown me the way." "Control your words," then, I insisted. "It is not in your power to prevent the victim from remaining on the altar of atonement." Having said this, he walked away like an illuminated shadow disappearing into the horizon, leaving me relieved, for his presence was a weight I could not bear. Herod, then ruler of Galilee and already an old man, joined Jesus' enemies to carry out his revenge. If it had depended solely on Herod, he would have ordered Jesus' death immediately. However, despite his pride in his position, he hesitated, fearing that such an act might damage his influence with the Senate. Perhaps, like me, he also feared Jesus, but it would be unworthy of a Roman officer to admit fear of a Jew. Herod visited the praetorium, and after a superficial conversation, as he was leaving, he asked me my opinion about the Nazarene. I told him that Jesus seemed like a great philosopher, like those that a great nation occasionally produces, and that his teachings had nothing to do with politics. I added that Rome allowed him to speak freely because his actions did not justify any intervention. Herod gave me an ironic smile and took his leave. As Passover approached, the Jews were ready to exploit the popular fervor that took over the city during the celebration. Jerusalem was filled with an agitated crowd clamoring for Jesus' crucifixion. My informants revealed that the temple treasury had been used to bribe the people. The danger was imminent, and a Roman centurion was publicly disrespected. I wrote to the procurator of Syria requesting reinforcements, 100 infantry soldiers and 100 cavalry, but my request was denied. I was isolated, with a small group of veterans in a hostile and rebellious city, without the strength to contain an uprising and with no alternatives but to tolerate the situation. The frenzied crowd shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" At that moment, three major factions united against Jesus: the Herodians, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees. The ambiguous position of the Herodians and Sadducees was motivated by two factors: they hated Jesus and were weary of Roman domination. They never forgave me for entering Jerusalem with banners bearing the image of the emperor, and although I had already been reprimanded for it, they considered my act unforgivable. Another conflict was also brewing. I suggested using part of the temple treasury to finance public works, and this proposal was seen by the Pharisees, Jesus' declared enemies, as an unacceptable affront. Moreover, they harbored deep resentment over the sharp criticisms the Nazarene had directed at them for years, everywhere he went. Beyond the groups conspiring against Jesus, I also had to deal with a tumultuous and opportunistic population, always ready to join any rebellion and take advantage of the disorder that arose. In this scenario, Jesus was brought before the high priest and sentenced to death. It was then that Caiaphas, the high priest, displaying an apparently sincere submission, sent Jesus to me so that I might confirm the sentence and ensure its execution. I declared that since Jesus was from Galilee, the responsibility for his trial should fall upon Herod. I sent him there, but Herod, acting with false humility and feigned reverence for the representative of Caesar, returned him to me, placing the burden back on my shoulders. My palace quickly became a besieged fortress, with the number of malcontents growing by the moment. Jerusalem seemed to be flooded with crowds coming down from the mountains of Galilee. It was as if all of Judea had gathered there. A Gallic seer, who claimed to foresee the future, threw herself at my feet in tears, saying, "Beware, do not touch this man, for he is holy." Last night, I had a vision. He walked on the waters, flew on the wings of the wind, calmed storms, and spoke with the fish in the lake, who obeyed him. I saw the river on Mount Catherine stained with blood, the statues of Caesar shedding tears, and the morning sun like a morning virgin. If you ignore the warnings of your wife, great misfortune awaits you. Fear the curse of the Senate and the thrones of Caesar. Meanwhile, the marble steps trembled under the weight of the crowd. When they brought Jesus back to me, I went to the tribunal, accompanied by my guard, and asked the enraged mob what they wanted. They clamored for Jesus' death. What is his crime? I asked. He has blasphemed, prophesied the destruction of the temple, and declared himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews, they replied. I explained that Roman justice did not condemn anyone to death for such accusations, but the cries of "Crucify him! Crucify him!" echoed through the furious crowd, shaking the palace walls. Among them all, only Jesus remained serene. In an attempt to save his life, I suggested releasing a prisoner, as was the tradition during the festivities, and proposed that Jesus be set free. However, the people demanded his crucifixion. I tried to argue, citing the very Jewish laws that dictated that a defendant could not be condemned unless the judges had fasted for an entire day and that the sentence required the approval of the Sanhedrin and its president. I explained that the accused had the right to 3 opportunities to present a new defense. Still, the cries for his execution did not cease. Finally, I ordered that Jesus be scourged, believing that this would satisfy the crowd, but their hatred only grew. I called for a basin and, before the enraged mob, washed my hands, declaring that I found no guilt in Jesus that justified his death. However, my words were in vain. Jesus' fate was already sealed. That day, I witnessed a fury I had never seen before, not even in the worst civil uprisings. It was as if all the forces from the depths had been unleashed upon Jerusalem. The crowd did not walk but seemed to swirl like a whirlwind, moving in furious waves from the gates of the Praetorium to Mount Zion, while screams and shouts surpassed any agitation I had ever witnessed in the rebellions of Pannonia or the Roman Forum. As the day progressed, a darkness like the winter twilight descended upon the city, reminiscent of the Ides of March and the death of Julius Caesar. Leaning against a corner of the basilica, I watched helplessly as the somber spectacle of the Nazarene being led to Calvary unfolded. The city seemed deserted, as if all its inhabitants had passed through the funeral gates on their way to Jamnia. A heavy air of sorrow hung over Jerusalem. While the sounds of agony echoed from Golgotha, the dark clouds covering the temple spread over the city like a mourning veil. During these events, I heard that Dionysius, the patriarch, exclaimed, "Either the Creator suffers, or the universe is unraveling." Amid this terror, an earthquake shook Lower Egypt, terrifying the superstitious Jews and causing great commotion. Balthasar, a learned Jew from Antioch and a friend of Jesus, was found dead after the tremor. It is unknown whether his death was caused by fear or by grief. In the first hour of the night, I descended toward the gates of Golgotha. The sacrifice had already been completed. The crowd was returning home, carrying a mixture of agitation and remorse. I saw my Roman court in silence, downcast. The flag-bearer had veiled the standard with the eagle as a sign of mourning, marking the end of a day that, to me, seemed like a prelude to even darker times. As I walked through the Praetorium, I heard Jewish soldiers murmuring words I could not understand. Some spoke of events they associated with miracles, similar to those we Romans usually attributed to the gods. Men and women, in small groups, stopped and looked toward Mount Calvary as if expecting another extraordinary sign. When I returned to the Praetorium, I felt the weight of guilt as I climbed the stairs, still stained with the Nazarene's blood. I came across an elderly man kneeling in supplication, surrounded by Romans in tears. He threw himself at my feet, sobbing deeply. Seeing an old man cry is something that breaks the heart, and, already consumed by sorrow, I could not hold back my own tears. The moment was so intense that it seemed as though everyone there, including the surrounding crowd, was on the verge of weeping. It was something never seen before. Those who had betrayed Jesus or shouted for his crucifixion had vanished like cowards. "Father," I asked, controlling myself, "who are you, and what do you desire?" "I am Joseph of Arimathea," he replied, "and I come to plead for permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth." I granted his request and ordered Manios to escort Joseph with a group of soldiers to ensure that the body would not be violated. A few days later, the tomb was found empty, and the disciples began proclaiming that Jesus had risen, just as he had foretold. This caused an even greater commotion than his own death. Although I cannot say with certainty what happened, I made sure to investigate thoroughly. Joseph used his own tomb for the burial, but I do not know if he had any prior knowledge or intention regarding the resurrection. The day after the burial, a concerned priest came to the Praetorium, warning that the disciples might steal the body to make it appear that Jesus had risen. To prevent such a situation, I ordered the captain of the guard, Marcus, to assign Jewish soldiers to guard the tomb, making it clear that any failure would fall upon them, not the Romans. When news of the empty tomb spread, my unease grew. I sought out Marcus, who reported that he had assigned Lieutenant Ben-Am and 100 soldiers for the watch. He told me that Isam and his men had been terrified by what they had witnessed that morning. Isam recounted the events as accurately as possible. He described that during the fourth watch, a soft and unusual light appeared over the tomb. At first, he thought it was women coming to embalm the body, but he soon realized something was wrong. Suddenly, the entire area was intensely illuminated, and he saw what seemed to be a multitude of the dead in burial shrouds, all rejuvenated and radiating joy. A celestial music echoed, filling the air with praises to God. Immediately after, the earth began to shake violently. Isam felt weak and collapsed to the ground, losing consciousness. When he regained his senses, he was lying face down, and the place remained illuminated, though the rest of the area was still dark. I asked Isam if he could have mistaken the light for the dawn. He denied it, explaining that the sky was still dark on the horizon. I questioned whether the tremor could have been caused by dizziness or exhaustion, but he assured me that he had remained awake throughout the watch. Despite his fear, it was not until reinforcements arrived that he and the other guards withdrew. Isam also revealed that the priests pressured him to say that the disciples had stolen the body while the guards were asleep. He refused, stating that he had seen no disciples and only learned of the body's disappearance when informed by his superiors. Furthermore, he mentioned that some priests believed Jesus was more than an ordinary man, perhaps even a divine figure who had walked the earth in other ages. This theory aligns with the accounts about Jesus. Both friends and enemies agree that he seemed to have mastery over the elements of nature. He turned water into wine, healed the sick, raised the dead, calmed storms, and even found coins in the mouths of fish. As for his appearance, Jesus was unique. He had an average height, a serene demeanor, and a striking presence that drew the gaze of many. His face radiated kindness, with balanced features and an expression that conveyed peace and wisdom. His eyes, described as deep and varying in tone between light brown and blue, exuded compassion and understanding, as if seeing beyond the surface. His hair was long, soft, and slightly wavy, of a light brown or golden color, making him stand out among the region's inhabitants. His beard was full and well-kept, reinforcing his image of dignity and maturity. His garments were simple but always clean, reflecting his humility and disregard for material wealth. Now, my sovereign, this is the most faithful account I can offer of what transpired. I have endeavored to document the facts with precision, allowing you to judge my conduct fairly. Criticism will surely come, but my conscience is clear. With loyalty and respect, I remain your faithful servant.
If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel now, click on the video appearing on your screen to discover more mysteries, and request the next topic that sparks your divine curiosity. May God bless you.